Would you believe that between when I get here on Sunday mornings and now, I forget what I've written in the sermon. So I'm sitting over there thinking, man, I hope I said something, well. I don't know what I'm going to say. What's going to come out of my mouth? Well, okay, I snuck up here and I think it checks out. Last year, I accompanied several Arizona Unitarian Universalists to a day at the legislature. And at the time, a bill was making its way through the process that would have enabled law enforcement to deputize border posse, who, with more self-righteousness than training, would have been effectively given sanction to hunt brown people on the border. We spoke with a key player in that process, with the grandiose hope of persuading him to kill the bill. The meeting was not going well. Basically, we were ganging up on this legislator, and he was becoming increasingly defensive and perturbed. No surprise, right? Kids, when you are angry at your mom or dad, or when you're angry at a friend and you yell at them, does that tend to change their mind? No. And that is exactly what was happening in this case. Our hopes were dying, and we were killing them. It was then that my friend and colleague, Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, from the Unitarian Universalist Church of Central Phoenix, said 5 magic words. Speaking to the legislator, she said, "As a person of faith," and then explained our hopes from that perspective. Now, it doesn't matter about the explanation that she gave so much. It was her declaration that she was a person of faith that seemed to make the difference. She had somehow picked up on this gentleman's identification and on his hopes and fears and found a way into his paradigm. A way in which he was able to hear her. From that moment on, the legislator's body language changed. The room became more relaxed. Breathing was easier. That bill never made it out of that fellow's office. I don't know how much credit we can take, but that's the end of the story. So tomorrow is this year's Unitarian Universalist Day at the legislature, and that means a few UUs from most every congregation, including this one, will visit some legislators together. And of course, last week we talked about global warming, and despite 30 years of consistent findings from the scientific community, how that remains controversial. And so tomorrow, Unitarian Universalists from Tucson, including some from this church, will be joining people of all flavors in a massive march in Washington, D.C. to protest the construction of the Keystone Pipeline. We seem to be awash at the moment in social justice concerns. So it is appropriate that this morning we explore our imperative for justice making in order to empower our justice making. We will ask why we do this as a religious community. And the answer to the why question will help us craft the answer to the subsequent question concerning the manner in which we go about doing our tasks. For that is the key to our prevailing. So why do we have the imperative to participate in justice work? And more particularly, why do we choose to do so through the lens of religious community. My hunch is that many of you are drawn to this community and are drawn to this work through this community because you have an inkling, however expressed or underexpressed or challenging to express, that justice work has a good bit to do with the spiritual path. And because sometimes I mean to push your buttons, but this is not one of them, I want you to understand what I mean by the word spiritual. You likely have your own understanding, but if you want to understand what I'm trying to convey to you, it will help if I am as clear as I can be. So we get to do a little pneumatology this morning. Pneuma is Greek for spirit. Ology is words about or study of. Pneuma is also Greek for breath. So right away, we discover something that we already knew, that the spirit and spirituality have something to do with vitality. It is life-giving to the practitioner. So keeping that in mind, I will attempt my definition of spirituality. Spirituality is the seeking of the sensation produced when there is harmony between our heart, our mind, and our relationships. Harmonizing our feelings with the justification for them, and then again with the world, is what deep integrated connectivity feels like. Now the synchronicity required by harmony, it all has to take place at the same time. So the synchronicity required by harmony, the fact that it must all take place at once, has the effect of obliterating or expanding the experience of time, so that one experiences a taste of the infinite. And timelessness, it seems, is achieved only through spectacular timing. And like any good harmony, this kind of synchronicity produces a new fourth component, the spiritual experience. In fact, Larry Castriata illustrated this perfectly earlier this week when he explained what happens in a barbershop quartet. And Larry can do this way better than I can. So could you tell everyone what you told us this past weekend?
What barbershoppers like to do, they'll get together and say, let's ring a chord. And what that amounts is this. First off, a chord has four parts. And LB, you can't correct me if I'm wrong on this.
Yeah.
It's the root note, the third note, the third of the note, the fifth of the note, and the seventh. And when barbershoppers sing those notes, it's bum bum. Okay. Now another thing that barbershoppers do is, who can tell me how many syllables there are in the word my? One, Sanjay? No, actually it's two. Well, and those two syllables are my. So when you're singing and you want to be clear that people can hear the words, you turn the diphthong. It's my. Now, if a barbershopper sings with a vibrato, the sound wave would look like this. But if a barbershopper sings without a vibrato, just straight along, and each part, the bass, the baritone, the lead, and the tenor, if they all sing on that flat note and say the exact same word, the exact same way, those four notes create a fifth note called an overtone. And that's ringing a chord.
Thanks, Larry. I would like to extend that Anything that happens in this radius is incorrectable.
Ex cathedra.
So the overtone, that's a good word. So like a barbershop quartet, harmonizing emotion, intellect, and circumstance, harmonizing everything you experience in a moment produces a fourth sensation, an overtone that is experienced in a state of timelessness. It may or may not feel like transcending wonder. It may in fact feel quite serene and simple. It may feel like runner's high. It may feel like the mind of God. It may feel precisely like chopping wood when you are chopping wood. It seems that the intensity and the vocabulary of the experience is variable. And so that, my friends, is my definition of spirituality, rough and quick and for now. It was a bit of a detour, but I think it was necessary if you want to know what I'm saying when I suggest that justice work is spirit work. Because I believe that working for justice from the religious perspective can synchronize our feelings with our thoughts and with all that we relate to. Justice work presents us with the opportunity to harmonize our emotions with our principles and carry that into the circumstances of the world. Thus, in working to transform the world, we are working to transform ourselves and inspiring others to do likewise. And this transformation may or may not achieve full fruition in both or either worldly systems or personal experience. It may or may not work. But as long as justice work is conducted from the religious perspective, the possibility of changing systems exists. And that possibility, I would say, that possibility by itself invites great power. For informed by the spiritual imagination, religiously engaged justice work is backed by the power of the timeless that it seeks to encounter. It is empowered by the sensation, imagining, and memory of infinite connectivity, empowered by the overtone. Change in the finite world is deeper and more lasting if it is backed by this sensation, imagining, and memory of the infinite. Now, what this means is that we have to practice what we preach. This is important to know because doing justice work is apparently adversarial. So it is in a spiritual manner, that is, powered by infinite integrity and guided by our values, that we approach our apparent adversaries. I want to stress the word apparent, because what is apparent may also be incorrect. Indeed, within the imperative to do justice, within our spiritual framework is the imperative to find the ally within our adversary. In our hearts and minds, we can afford them that which by our own promotion we say they inherently have: dignity. That is our first principle. And now we are talking about how we do justice in a spiritual way. It means that we do not confuse people with their ideas and brand people as racist or sexist or homophobic or classist or fascist. Once such a label is applied, it is all too easy to dismiss their perspective and disregard their humanity, which would mean that we are doing the exact same thing that we are fighting against For though an expression may indeed be intentionally or accidentally racist or sexist or homophobic or classist or fascist, there is a person behind those words telling us something deep about their needs and fears. If we are patient enough, which means strong enough, we can read between those lines. And when we see the fear and the need behind these dismaying words and brutal policies, then we have an opportunity to empathize with that person on an emotional level, a level that is pre-policy and pre-rational, at the gut level. That is the level where people are transformed. Now, we have an understanding of what it is that will allow a person to change at that level. And now we too are changed. For we have endured in the face of hate by an exercise of love. So during my internship in Ogden, Utah, our church worked to pass a city ordinance that would protect housing and employment rights for gay, lesbian, bi, and transgender people. Even in conservative Utah, we thought this was a slam dunk. However, an adversary found us. It was another church. And they were able to convince the city council and the mayor that this was not a human rights issue protecting the livelihood and living conditions of GLBT people, but rather a free speech and religious liberty issue. And so our bid failed. Yet even in the midst of our heartbreak, a transformation did occur. You see, Unitarian Universalists have a spiritual advantage. Our spiritual integrity is rooted in the belief that all people have inherent worth and dignity. Life is sacred. It is a broad foundation that allows us to be more spiritually comprehensive than those who are so easily bogged down by dogma. It allows us to forego all the confusion and to truly love our enemy. Bearing witness to that spiritual disposition worked on the city council in such a way that even those who voted down the protective ordinance did so dismayed at their own actions. They too were heartbroken, torn between their transformed conscience and their enduring fear of breaching their sacred allegiance to the rights of speech and religion. Understanding that fear allowed us to relate to them as humans with inherent dignity, which only increased their moral quandary. What became plain was that the problem was no longer a lack of love, but a question of language. A problem that would not have been revealed by a less generous perspective than the one we brought to those meetings. With that in mind, the city council, our church, and the legal teams of our allies and our adversaries got together and worked the language. And today there is an ordinance on the books in Ogden protecting people from being evicted or fired for their sexual identities. So why did it work? It worked because of how we approached the fight. In both this case and the story I told to open about last year's UU Day at the legislature, we attempted to harmonize our sense of justice and injustice with our story about the inherent worth and dignity of all humanity, and found there a ground of infinite being that empowered us with compassion, even in the face of oppression and fear. Now, we did not know that we were doing that explicitly. That is my analysis of what occurred. That was not our mission statement. We just knew that we were doing spiritual work and justice work. We not only affected laws, we affected people. We opened the eyes of our apparent adversaries, and we opened our own eyes to the potential for good and transformation in humankind. We invited our work for justice to be based on our spiritual perspective, to be effective on a spiritual wavelength, and we were thereby simultaneously compelled by our spiritual perspective to work for justice. It is a cycle. Justice work is spirit work. And meanwhile, spirituality must manifest in justice seeking. It is the sensation of infinite connectivity, changing lives in time. Amen.